I think if nothing else, what Trump has opened up, yeah, it's a Pandora's box of madness and hellscape. We get that. But he's also opened up the American electorate in a way that no other presidential candidate has. And that includes Reagan and Clinton, who had that sort of, like it was said before, Clinton felt your pain and people connected with that, right? And Reagan, I mean, my goodness, brought so many people into the space, and gave them a voice, if you will. But Trump is different from all of that. And he can trash the historic leaders of the Republican Party, and people applaud him.
Well, and he can trash Latinos and women.
He also has a machismo and like a masculinity that he uses very aggressively. And it just, for whatever reason, he seems to be very good at beating women. And Harris did this thing where she was just traveling all the time and doing tons and tons of rallies, more than he was. And she still couldn't.
I think this is I know it's painful to talk about, but it's an important thing to talk about.
It's how he's opened the country up, and what has he opened it up to?
That is, I want to bring in, pause on this because we'll come back to it. I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, who's standing by at our NBC headquarters in D.C., and she was at Howard University earlier tonight. I think people saw her on television where the Harris campaign had gathered. We all watched and saw campaign co-chair Cedric Richmond speak, and he said earlier that we would hear from the vice president later today, and I'm saying later today because it's Wednesday. What else are you hearing from the campaign? What do we expect that to look like? Do we know more about what those plans are?
Those are all key questions that I'm asking people. Some of them are already asleep, so we might not get those answers till earlier today in terms of the details of when the vice president will speak. But we do expect her to speak today later at Howard University. And I want to just walk people through what the Harris campaign and really the people that are close to her have been like in the last few hours. They really did start off the night thinking 8 p.m., 9 p.m., sounding very optimistic, very confident. The vice president had been saying that she had the momentum. She was telling supporters in rally after rally that she believed she was going to win. And I was picking up on that cautious optimism. But right around 10 o'clock, 10:30, when it was clear that former President Trump was overperforming in places that were critical for him to win, including specifically in North Carolina and Georgia, I started to really sense a real shock and a real anxiety and a real worry from the Harris campaign and Harris aides. And that really just got darker and darker in terms of sort of their mood. At Howard University, people started to really have blank stares. They started to not be celebrating and dancing as they had been at the beginning of the night. And then later on, as it became clear that Donald Trump was going to be even closer to 270, especially after he won Pennsylvania, I started getting text messages from Harris aides who started pivoting, not from talking about whether or not she could still pull this off, but talking about how they would deal with a second Trump presidency. One aide telling me that he believes that he's going to try everything to try to push back on these policies, but also try to figure out a way to love the people that he disagrees with. So it's really interesting. Of course, the vice president, hasn't conceded. NBC hasn't called this race yet, but we are in this situation now where Harris aides and people close to her are definitely making the move toward how are we going to work with the Trump administration? How are we going to deal with these policies? So I think it's just really interesting in these wee hours in this morning that is, of course, a Wednesday morning. There are a lot of Democrats that are waking up shocked, or that are going to bed shocked, but are also sort of dealing with the reality, which is that they expect Donald Trump to be the president of the United States and come next year.
I've been thinking a lot about all those campaign aides who've been through a lot this year, a change at the top of the ticket, a tumultuous campaign. It sounds like what you're saying, Yamiche, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that because it was Vice President Harris, and again, we haven't called the race, but right now, unless she wins the presidency, she's not going to be in elected office anymore in a couple of months. But her aides are talking about how she will work with the White House or how they will work. Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, so in talking to aides, they're talking about how they're going to deal with these policies. So these aides are organizers, they're grassroots organizers, some of them are people who work with big donors who put their money in the things that they think are important, whether that's climate change, whether that's reproductive rights, whether that's immigration. So what I'm hearing it's not that the vice president would be working with President Trump if he were to be reelected, but that all the apparatus, all of her aides that are going to be in all these different sectors of society, that they're trying to think through how they deal with a second Trump presidency. So if he has a mass deportation policy, what does that look like? How do they push back on that? If he pulls back on climate change initiatives in this country, what are they going to be doing to try to figure out how to do that? In some ways, it mirrors what happened in 2016. There were a lot of Democratic organizers who started putting their heads together to figure out how to push back, even when they weren't in office, of course, as an elected officials, but they were trying to figure out where to put their resources and their time. And I think the thing that I'm sensing now, because a lot of Democrats have a sort of PTSD from 2016, one aide in particular was telling me, I need to figure out how to love people that I disagree with. So there's also not just the sort of work that needs to be done on the grassroots, but also how do Americans, when they're waking up and half the country is feeling like democracy's in danger and all of the different things that the vice president was saying about former President Donald Trump, how do they wrap their minds around the fact that this is a country that they love and that they have fellow Americans that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis? So a lot of that is just how do I deal with this country overall?
Yeah, Yamiche, thank you for that clarification. It's 4:20 in the morning, so I wanted to make sure I understood it the right way. But that is all of these organizers and people who've worked for her campaign. A lot of them, to your point, have come from climate groups and equal justice groups and civil rights groups and abortion rights groups. And these are people who are advocates for democracy in many ways in their souls, so they don't go away. In many ways, it's encouraging to hear that they are thinking about where they will be. Thank you, Yamiche, so much. I know you've been up for 1,000 hours. All right, let's come back to the table here. You know, this is a big, I know I keep prefacing this, NBC has not called this race yet, but tomorrow, Kamala Harris is going to, as Cedric Richmond said it, speak to the country. And speak to the Howard University audience there, of course, her alma mater. It's a big moment. And there are a lot of things I'm wondering, what does she need to say? What is the right thing to say? Does she indicate that she wants to still be a part, if she's not the winner of this race, of this fight? What do you think, Tim Miller? I'm going to go to you first.
Boy, it's going to be a real tough speech for her. So I feel really bad for the vice president and for her family and for the aides that worked really hard. We can all sit here on this panel and nitpick this thing or that thing that they did, but they really got caught up in a huge groundswell, a global groundswell, frankly, of incumbent parties that got pushed out, and then in this country, this cultural thing we've been talking about. So I feel for them. I think that what she has to do tomorrow is not worry about fixing the Democrats' brand problem in 2028. That's not a job for tomorrow. Tomorrow, her job is to do what Donald Trump didn't do in 2020, assuming that this race ends as we all expect it to. It's to concede gracefully. It's to say that she is going to uphold her values on reproductive rights and continue to fight for them, uphold her values on believing in democracy, and she'll certify that election on January 6th and do it proudly. And I think probably speak to young people in the country as well. I know she's really passionate about that. I think about tonight, I think about my daughter, and I think it's going to be tough. I think for we talked about the big wave appeal to Trump. Tens of millions of people voted for Kamala Harris tonight, and they have children, and there's going to be a lot of people that are really disappointed tomorrow, and speaking to them, I think that's going to be her job.
I have a tough convo, potentially, with my 9-year-old daughter.
Yes.